Thank you very much, Volker. It's a great pleasure, and I cannot stress enough because even before I joined the Weizenbaum Institute, I was already following the Plamadiso series of talk, and I always thought it was so cool and super insightful. And yeah, it's just a dream to participate here. So I'm really thankful for you opening the floor, and also with this very qualified audience, which gives me thrill to talk to, not only because it's being recorded, but already for the possibility of having your questions. So I thank you very much for your introduction. And as I already said, has been a work, a paper that I've been working together with my colleague, Jitendra Palepu. This is an outcome of a regulatory bilateral dialogue that we have been together with the Commission last year, and we interacted with the European Commission, with the DMA enforcement team, where they would like to know the instance of the free and open source community positions on interoperability and the relation with the gatekeepers. We will explain what gatekeepers are. So basically, the big tech, the largest companies in the world that are subject to the Digital Markets Act, and during this interaction, we thought that perhaps we can also develop this in an academic way, where we could dive deep into how interoperability is being regulated nowadays in the digital markets in Europe, right? So the agenda for today, we'll talk quickly how interoperability is understood under the regulation of digital markets, right? Because I think interoperability is a very broad term, and it's the type of area that we can study from very different perspectives, very different areas. But I would like to focus on the regulation of digital markets. And then, as you can see, the agenda has a lot of Apple there. So at least four topics about Apple, because we choose Apple as a case study. Apple was designated as gatekeeper under the Digital Markets Act. And since the position of the company in relation to compliance to the law provided us with very interesting insights. And that's why we focused our study on how access seekers, so other players in the market, are interacting with Apple in order to get interoperability with software features in Apple devices. Right, and then we will study Apple as a gatekeeper under of digital markets in the EU, Apple and the Digital Markets Act, and then the last 2 points will be the core part of the study, where we will entangle the Digital Markets Act, free and open source software. So this acronym is for FOSS, right, and how software projects that are they're providing alternative services, alternative app stores, browsers, payment systems that, in alternative to Apple's, they are requesting interoperability with Apple in order to have access to functionalities in Apple devices. And since and we were discussing just a minute with Volkan and also with Clara Keller about that interoperability is an evergreen topic, and it can, sparkle some nostalgia in several people. Yeah, I think this study also brings some insights from other times. But it's very actual, because it's not only in the past, but the regulatory processes in the telecom sector that are happening this year, last year. But in order to see that what the Commission, as the main enforcer of the Digital Markets Act, it's not doing something completely new, or this is not out of the blue, but interoperability with software features in devices are something that already been done in the telecom sector. And what are the main takeaways and lessons learned in the telecom sector that we could also bring as a comparison, as a standard for digital markets, right? So without further ado, let's get started. Volker was very kind already to provide some introduction about myself. But since this was before the recording, I just very quickly to say that I'm a postdoc researcher at the Just Transition Center at the Martin Luther University of Halle-Wittenberg. I've been working with open hardware standardization procedures, sustainability and regulation of digital markets there. At the Weizenbaum, as a researcher there, my main focus has been internet and platform regulation, telecommunications law, and cybersecurity as well. But parallel to this, to this academic work, I also work in civil society at the Free Software Foundation Europe, where I have been working mostly with free and open source software from the perspective of IP law, platform regulation, right? And there, so the main common area are the open technologies, free and open source software, open hardware, and sometimes open data as well. But and that's why. I think DMA has this potential to put everything together in a way that, that's why we can entangle all these topics in very interesting context for digital markets. And we will learn why free and open source are so key for digital markets. Before I move forward, I have some disclaimers here, right? Because not only my academic, but also my role in civil society, I think this is important. The Free Software Foundation Europe is intervening in very important court case, which was initiated by Apple versus the European Commission. And however, this study that we've been conducting and the conclusions of this study has nothing to do with this court case. So the topic for today is not about this court case. So I think this is an important disclaimer for us to put forward, especially because this talk is being recorded. And also, since I'm also here in a way representing the FSFE, the FSFE is an independent non-profit organization, right? And we depend on donations, and the donations come from individuals, from public money. So we receive a lot of public money, but we also receive some corporate donations, right? The link for the donations are there. And some of the corporate donations were done by the gatekeepers themselves, right? But no funding was received specifically for this study. With these disclaimers out of the way, I would like to start with the contradictions of interoperability, right? An evergreen topic, very close to the heart of many of us, right? But as soon as, or as society grow in complexity, interoperability of assets and infrastructure become inevitable. Not long ago, I've been in Japan, and I was amazed by the level of interoperability with old tech together with shining tech, and everything works together, and everything is connected. And we see indeed that network industries, the telecom and the digital, they benefit a lot from interoperability. And new players that they are entering in the industry, they benefit a lot, right? And especially this relation between newcomers in the market and the incumbents, those that are well established, creates a contradiction. Historically, interoperability is marked by a striking contradiction, if you will. While market actors benefit from interoperability themselves, they step back and react when their assets become important enough to be subject to interoperability obligations. This became very, very clearly in the telecom liberalization process in the 90s in Europe, in Latin America, in other parts of the world, where while interoperability was key for the incumbents, when you open the market for competition and for newcomers, the incumbents take a very reactionary approach, and they try the best they can to limit interoperability. And this is also with Apple, right? And Apple benefited, and here I'm starting already to mention Apple as a case study, and Apple will permeate the entire length of this study. Apple benefited in whole history from interoperability, right? So when the iPhone was launched in 2007, it didn't have an app store, right? But it was the interoperability, or in case of Apple, compatibility, but interoperability in broad sense, that caused this innovation boost on the app stores. Because then suddenly a multitude of apps in app stores provided end users with endless possibilities and to use their own devices, right? And parallel to that, it was the possibility of using Apple that was not necessarily a prepaid device. So interoperability between Apple devices, iPhones, with different network operators. So interoperability between network, the cellular network with the devices also benefited Apple a lot, and so this freedom of software, first of all, because then users had the possibility to enjoy a multitude of apps from app stores, and also the freedom of terminal equipment in the telecom terminology, that they could use their devices not necessarily linked to one type of network, but they could use the device in several networks, benefited Apple a lot. However, Apple has focused on a distinctive, technically and legally closed system that prioritize internal compatibility among Apple devices against cross-platform interoperability. And what I mean by that, so Apple devices, Apple has set a two-layer approach when it deals with interoperability, right? So it is the compatibility between the devices within a determined ecosystem. So an iPhone communicates very well with iPad, and iPad with iCloud, and iCloud with your macOS, right? But as soon as Apple has established this wallet garden, if you will, this closed system, interaction with this system becomes very close. Think about macOS, even Bluetooth does not work with other devices, right? Sometimes they limit the USB ports, they limit the connection with other devices, right? So here we see that interoperability is much hindered in relation to compatibility. And especially because of that, Apple, this very strict and close approach to their ecosystem, Apple has become a gatekeeper in digital markets with very interesting characteristics, right? Here, when we see the market for operating systems for mobile devices, we have two gatekeepers. We have Google in one hand and Apple in another hand, right? And together they have 99% of the world market for operating systems in mobile devices, right? And but there is an elephant in the room, right? Because although they dominate completely this market, when we look into the software industry in the EU, and there was a study from the Commission in 2022 when the Commission was proposing the Cyber Resilience Act, the study concluded that 94% of the software industry in EU is composed by SMEs with less than 9 employees. So we have a myriad of very small companies, and these companies are dependent on the infrastructure. They're dependent on the devices of two very, very, very large companies. So there is a disbalance of power. There is a disbalance of how these software companies, they can leverage their bargaining power. They leverage their interests against Apple and Google, right? And this power has been very clearly exercised by Gatekeeper, for an example, in relation to interoperability. Therefore, the regulatory reaction from the European Union has been the Digital Markets Act, right? And this talk is all about Article 6.7. Article 6.7 of the DMA is a fundamental article and a provision of the law, and I would like to read together with you. Article 6.7 says, the gatekeeper, Google, Apple, and all the companies that the European Commission designate as gatekeeper. Today, there aren't many. There are 6, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So are the usual suspects, right? Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google, Meta, and ByteDance, which is TikTok, and Booking as well. So the gatekeeper shall allow providers of services and providers of hardware here free of charge, effective interoperability with and access for the purpose of interoperability to the same hardware and software features accessed or controlled via the operating system. And then as are available to services or hardware provided by the gatekeeper. So basically, as soon as Apple provides functionality or a feature that is controlled via operating system, as they should give access to this feature to other providers, to third parties, right? So this is where interoperability happens. So if Apple has access to, for example, the camera in the device, Apple should give access to the camera to alternative camera apps, right? This is the same for payment systems. This is the same for NFC chips. This is the same for microphone. And yeah, so basically, as soon as Apple has access to these functions that are controlled by the operating system, alternative should have. So under the DMA, the Commission designated not only Apple, but the Commission should also designate which type of service a DMA will apply. And the Commission designate iOS and iPadOS, right? And differently from Microsoft and Google, which adopted a very broader approach to interoperability. I would not say interoperability by default, but a much broader approach to interoperability. Basically, they have the APIs documented online, and so alternative services, they can already automatically have access to these APIs and have access to the same functions, for an example, in Android or in Microsoft Windows, right? Apple proposed a request-driven approach. So basically, everything is closed, and they analyze case by case if the request falls under Article 6.7, and then when they do so, then they grant interoperability to access seeker, right? And then, this was really restrictive, and of course there was a huge, reaction from not only from the industry but from civil society, where my work was involved, and then we criticized this request-driven approach, right? Because Article 6.7 is very clear, right? So this should be a broad grant, right? But then we're going to talk about this. I don't want to give some spoilers. The Commission then in December last year opened an investigation in order to see if this request-driven approach would be compliant with the DMA and what to do about this. So now things started to get interesting. We had this background on Apple and how we will approach interoperability in this context. But why FOSS is important for Digital Markets Act? First, in the more than 90% of all software being developed in the world nowadays contains free and open source software. Free software is not software that are gratis or free of charge. Free software refers to the four freedoms of software. This one that you are seeing in the screen: the freedom to run the program, study and change the source code, redistribute the program, and distribute copies of the program and the source code. Right? Can be commercial software, but software that are protected by a license that grants these four freedoms. And there's really a lot of free and open source projects out there. They are providing alternative services to the proprietary ones from Apple, Google, and Microsoft. And sometimes, and most of the time, they are not big tech. They are small tech. They are even not for profit. Can you imagine alternative browsers, alternative app stores, alternative payment systems that are not for profit. And this is super cool, because this really gives us alternative views on how the digital markets can be structured, how the digital economy can be structured, right? So therefore, I believe, and we believe at FSFE, and that DMA is not only about competition about gatekeepers. So it's not about the fight about big dogs, like competition among Apple and Google and Meta and Microsoft. But also, DMA is all about leveling the playing field for access seekers, including not-for-profit, right? Because they are providing services that compete with gatekeepers, not only scale, right, but in merits and principles. So perhaps, indeed, we're going to talk about some of these alternatives. Perhaps they are not super known in the markets yet, but they are functional, they are working, and sometimes they provide better services in the way, right, than the gatekeeper services themselves. So sometimes they are more privacy oriented, like Tor, for an example. Sometimes they are alternatives, so you can bypass gatekeepers like Thaler, alternative payment systems, or they provided very curated services. For an example, like the F-Droid. F-Droid is alternative app store where the apps there, they are free software. So you don't need to worry about that. And then if the app is not completely free and open source software, they put some disclaimers there, right? So they put some tags. So they offer this type of curation, right? So, and therefore, the user experience is much more diverse, and you can find services that are more suitable for your own needs, right? And these are the projects that we interviewed. These were the projects that we worked for an entire year together in order to scrutinize, in order to analyze their experience in requesting interoperability with Apple, or not necessarily with Apple, but also with Google. But for this study, we focus on Apple, right? Some disclaimer, this list is not exhaustive, so we talked with much more people, much other projects, but these were the ones that mostly contributed to the study. And these projects are not affiliated with the FSFE. So the FSFE is not a software developer organization per se, so we are not providing alternatives to gatekeepers, right? So they are also independent, and that's why we could interview and interact with them. So from this interaction, we could put together several case studies, okay? And these case studies refers to notarization, security paternalism, and decision-making and due process. So let's dive into it. So one of the first and perhaps the most serious blocker, if you will, or blocker, I would say, actually, against interoperability for open source projects, free and open source projects interacting or requesting interoperability from Apple is what's so-called Apple's notarization practices. And what is this? Notarization means curation, right? So labeling. It is a common practice in the software industry. And for an example, F-Droid provides some type of notarization. It's a labeling. But when Apple uses this term, it's much broader. So for Apple, notarization means a complete app overview and review with automated and human checks. When Apple do this, they exercise gatekeeper control over interoperability and sideloading of alternative app stores and alternative apps via these app stores, right? And this caused a very serious problem. This has a negative impact on free and open source project. Because when Apple, how this works, so basically, if you wanted to submit your Apple to App Store and your app is free software, and in order to exercise the free software, you should have access to the source code. So, transparency over the source code is key, right? But then what Apple does, the injection of the software, when Apple receives this, and when Apple analyzes this and then further distribute the apps via the App Store, Apple's create an encryption layer over the program, creating an opaque layer over the source code. So this encryption is done via digital rights management, and it doesn't allow audit of the source code, right? And therefore, you're blocking not only the freedoms of the software that is key for free software, but you also creating problems for security, because then you are not able to do the credible, reproducible build, which is basically when you confirm that a binary of a program that is running on your smartphone is exactly when you decompile it to the source code that is stored on an online repository, GitLab, GitHub, or anything that you will. So in order for you to compare the binary that is running your device, in your Apple device, and a source code that is stored in a repository, because sometimes with some exceptions, your devices are running binaries, not the source code itself, right? So in order for you to create this match, and then you can then search for vulnerabilities, search for spyware, search for malware, search for viruses and other stuff, you need to be 100% sure that it is the same software. But when you have this encryption layer, you cannot do this, right? And this is very problematic because this notarization fundamentally differs between iOS and macOS. There is no notarization on macOS on this sense. So basically, alternative apps can be automatically side-loaded in macOS, but Apple still exercises very strict control over iOS, right? So there are some examples of there. So for an example, a free software emulator. An emulator is very important. When you want to try your system in another operating system. So emulators are not only important for games, but also for developing alternative apps, right? And it was blocked, and then it was allowed, and then Apple stated that the PC is not a console and blocked it to aim to run PC emulation on iOS, right? So the conclusion on this is that third-party apps usually need essential inputs to compete with the ones with the services provided by Apple, right? And Apple can strategically deny access to interoperability in order to keep advantage, right? So interoperability in this case, blocking interoperability in this case via notarization, just entrench even more the gatekeeper control over interoperability of app stores or side loading. So the solution here would be the completely disintermediation through side loading, and alternatives app store should be authorized without special entitlements. There's a typo there, I'm sorry. But so basically, if you want to notarize, it is fine, but this complete overview with DRMs and encryption involved, although they claim this for security, but actually is creating problems for security, right? So the second case study, and I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit quick, but please write your questions. I'm very happy to discuss this with you, especially if you have some question about how this is bad for security, because at first glance this could be good for security, but we can dive a little bit deeper on this. But in any case, notarization creates a consequence, a corollary for security paternalism, right? And limitations to sideload and are based on overstated security concerns. And this has been a practice since the beginning of the existence of iPhones, where Apple had a very, very strict control against the jailbreaking, even the name of jailbreaking, right? It's basically allowing you to install alternative apps on your iPhone. I find really cool, amazing how the marketing terms, and we were discussing with Volker just a minute ago about the terminology, right? And the software industry is marked by this contradictory terms, right? For an example, piracy, when you want to copy a software, right? When you copy a software, you're not, with a sword and navigating in a ship and, robbing, practicing all sorts of types of crimes. Jailbreaking, all the same, you are not breaking for any kind of jail. You are just installing an alternative system, or even side loading. Why you are side loading? It means like it looks like that you are using alternative routes. Actually, you are just installing. And everyone here has a laptop, and we are able to install any type of app that we want in our laptop. If you're using even macOS, right? So you can download alternative browsers, you can download softwares. Zoom, for an example, when you go there and just download, you don't side load stuff on your computer, right? So you're not like putting this on the sideways, but you are just directly downloading, right? In any case, this case study based on security paternalism of Apple shows us that, and we will see this in a minute, that similar to the telecom sector in the EU, security concerns has been overstated in detriment of interoperability. However, evidence against interoperability or security being punched or being impacted by interoperability is fragile, though, and we will see this when we talk about the telecom sector, right? Last but not least, access seekers are suffering delays in requesting interoperability, or facing or they don't have access to sufficient documentation, or they have requests that are being unduly denied, and there's a ton of lack of transparency in the decision making. Right? We talk with some projects. There's AppDB App Store, where they request interoperability, and then they took months for them to react to the request, right? And I think that the conclusion on this particular topic, the decision-making and due process, is what motivated Commission to start an investigation on how this request-driven approach would impact interoperability. So we were very happy, very, very happy. I was very happy because after almost 1 year of interaction with the Commission, with the DMA enforcement team, Commission, in the end of last year, they opened an investigation on this, and they started a specification procedure. It was the first, if I'm not mistaken, under the DMA, in order to propose measures to improve, on their view, the request-driven approach. Here, there is a nice history and a sad history, and that's why I divided the conclusions of this history. So basically, the takeaways of all these case studies, all these interactions that we brought to the Commission, right? Of course, not one us, but we were part on the regulatory dialogues. The Commission was having regulatory dialogues with other stakeholders as well, of course. But we were the main ones bringing the views of the open source community, the free and open source community. We were the main ones, right? But the history here, it was a big too long didn't read. It was a big victory, in my view. The Commission proposed profound changes on the decision-making and due process of granting interoperability to access seekers. This was great. But however, the Commission, from the preliminary decision that was really great in December, in January of 2025, to the final decision in March 2025, there was some developments. Unfortunately, relative negative developments, and that's why the takeaways from this regulatory process regarding interoperability, I divide in three: the good, the bad, the ugly. Right. So the good. Commission analyzed the request driven and found that it had a lot of shortcomings, right? And therefore, Commission produced a huge document. So if you open the first decision, it's huge, right? So and it was substantial improvement on due process for decision making over interoperability. So Commission proposed obligations that include access to documentation, API documentation, transparency of decision making, due process for handling interoperability requests. They even went further with conciliation procedures for handling rejections. A comprehensive open track review system for requests. So now it's possible to for other development or other developers to see what other developers has been requesting. So this is super cool, and also impose reporting obligations to Apple. So numbers of requests, number of denials. So it improved massively. So it was a massive improvement. It was the first decision. The bad. Although it was a massive improvement, this has a very industrial tone on this. The procedures itself is quite complex. I think we can have a master, and Volker, perhaps you can help me organize at the Humboldt or any other university, a master degree on these procedures, because they are quite complex, and there's a lot of tracks, and they are layers. There are phases for granting interoperability, and I think companies, if they wanted to request interoperability from gatekeepers, especially from Apple, they will have to have a team work on this, because it will involve conciliation. This will involve several instances of decision making, documentation, reporting obligations. So although for companies of the size of Apple or Meta that are requesting interoperability among themselves, I think this makes sense. But for FOSS projects, for SMEs, and we saw that in Europe, 94% of the software industry are SMEs with less than nine employees. And for these projects, the software projects that live on donations, in order to engage with these procedures is quite complex. It's quite problematic, because the guys there developing alternative software, and then now it has to read all of this, and then he had to understand all these legalese. He has to understand all the technical legal terms that now it's on these procedures. Instead, I think we could have a very more compact and more incisive obligation over Apple. And this is where leads to the ugly part of it. And in the final decision, there was a substantial downgrade. The Commission dumped the concept of interoperability by default that it proposed to Apple. If you check in the first section, in the first decision, I cannot see you, but if you go there, and you go to section 2.1, I'm sorry, there was a whole section where the Commission proposed in the preliminary decision to impose on Apple an obligation to publicly produce the API documentation that would be accessible to all. That would be a massive improvement, And then Commission, in the final decision in March, removed altogether this part, Commission removed that. And now they create a different topic that are aimed at individual requests, query for technical reference. Now the documentation is not more public anymore, but individual developers should ask for this type of documentation, API documentation, and the interoperability request individually. This is one example of a downgrade. Second downgrade is that there was a whole section on interoperability by default. That when I saw that in December, in the January decision, I was amazed. I said, my God, the Commission really went down the road in order to impose a really deep interoperability obligations, but then they removed. If you do a Control F in the second decision, the final decision, there is no more sections on interoperability by default, right? So what are the takeaways? There are good parts, which I subscribe, and I think this is great, but there are also some compromises, right? In any case, on the case studies for free and open source software, the new specs, interoperability specs measure when it goes to security paternalism. So the obligations for query on technical reference, transparency on reasons for rejection, and the conciliation process that are all proposed by the Commission will help in reducing this paternalism approach over security. It will not solve it, but will help somehow. In order to really tackle this, we need a much broader approach to this. This is the same for notarization. Unfortunately, I think the current interoperability specs do not help too much in breaking notarization down. Almost nothing. Perhaps only what will help is that Apple will have to prove that the rejections of the interoperability grants were done due to notarization, and then perhaps we can build up a database of all the decisions that were rejected by notarization, and then we can say that this is bad for digital markets, and then we can do some studies over there. Where the specification really shines is improving the decision-making and the due process, right? So it improves the documentation quality for interoperability, the due process, the timeline for requests, the conciliation procedures, and the reporting decision. So basically, this last case study was the main star of this interoperability specification procedure. So, but now you say, oh my God, you talk a lot about digital markets, and where is the telecom? So after all this, I would like very quickly to just give you a glimpse how interoperability in relation to devices and networks. So in similar context, especially in regard to software, is done on the telecom. I have been for 6 years now very much involved in regulating freedom of terminal equipments, routers and modems, right? People usually forget about this piece of equipment, but they are very important. You have a router in your home. In Weizenbaum, we have a router. So in your work, you have routers. Most likely, your device, your computer is now connected to the internet via a router. So there are privacy, security, and freedom of choice issues regarding to routers and modems, as it is with our smartphones. So since routers are being handled by internet services provided, Vodafone, Orange, 101, Deutsche Telekom, in this sense, ISPs, internet service providers, they are gatekeepers of the networks. They are much smaller than Apple and Google, and therefore they are not subjected to the DMA, of course, but they are gatekeepers of the network. And the discriminatory positions that several ISPs, in Germany not so much because we overcome this, but in other countries in Europe, have in relation to routers and modems is quite similar to gatekeepers Apple and Google in relation to smartphones. So they really exercise very tight control over devices. And this is bad for FOSS, because for free software, because end users, similarly to Apple, which we cannot run alternative operating systems, users cannot run alternative operating systems on their routers and to inspect the firmware to see the source code, as they cannot see the source code in apps that are being notarized by Apple, right? And differently from the DMA, which now has put very solid and concentrated and harmonized rules for the digital markets, the situation in the telecom sector is way, way worse. We have a fragmentation of the rules over there. We have open internet regulation, but then we have national implementations from several iterations of telecom regulation laws. But in any case, here, I don't want to focus too much on this. I would like just to show you how interoperability has been used as a tool for opening the networks of ISPs for competition, especially in regards to devices, routers, and modems, which also can serve as a starting point for the discussion over smartphones, the ones like from Apple and Google. We had a very, very good decision in Germany this year, in January. Bundesnetzagentur, the German telecom regulator, allowed end users to use their own routers in fiber networks. And in a very long decision, the German telecom regulator established that security risks are overstated by ISPs in relation to interoperability. Therefore, theoretical disruptive scenarios are not enough to limiting interoperability, and they need the data. From all these years, there was only one disruption on the network, only one disruption of the network caused by interoperability. How millions of devices are connected to fiber networks nowadays in Germany, and we have just one. So security risks are way overstated. In 2023, we had a very good decision also from the Belgian telecom regulator. They said that interoperability between devices and networks should be provided quickly, up to 1 month. So, ISPs should quickly provide interoperability to end users' devices. ISPs should not have self-preference regarding device security, and the interfaces should be public and well documented. So alternative routers providers should provide alternative routers to connect to the ISP's network. In the Netherlands, we had similar decision in 2021. The ACM, the Dutch regulator, said the open standards and process for determining security best practices benefit operators. End users should also be educated about the benefits of interoperability. So all of this concur to our work as civil society, as academics, to encourage and to foster the Commission to go a further mile and to impose this on gatekeepers and to not be afraid, because this has been done already in the telecom sector, in Germany, in Belgium, the Netherlands, now in Italy. There's a regulatory process happening at this very moment in Italy as well. So I do think that regulators in Europe had the courage to state this, all these good things about interoperability, and we should learn this for the digital markets as well. I thank you very much, and I'm really glad to discuss this with you. Thank you.